Driving for Uber was never part of my life plan. It started as a side gig, something to make ends meet when my main job cut my hours. But over time, I found a strange comfort in the solitude of the road. The hum of the engine, the late-night city lights, the fleeting conversations with strangers, each write a small story in itself. That night started like any other. A quiet Thursday, the streets damp from an earlier rain. I had already completed a few rides, nothing remarkable. A tired nurse heading home from a late shift, a couple arguing in the back seat about their weekend plans. Just the usual. I pulled into a gas station, stretching my legs as I filled up the tank. My phone buzzed, a new ride request. The pickup location was only a few blocks away. I accepted it without a second thought, got back in, and drove toward the pin on the map. When I arrived, the street was dimly lit, the glow of a neon bar sign flickering above the entrance. A woman stood there, her silhouette framed against the light. She was laughing, her head tilted back as she spoke to someone just out of view. I couldn't see their face, only the faint outline of a man standing close, too close. As she turned, my stomach twisted into a knot. I knew that figure. The way she brushed her hair behind her ear. The way she shifted her weight slightly on her left leg when she stood. It was my wife. And she wasn't alone. At first, my mind refused to process what I was seeing. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or maybe I was just exhausted from too many late-night drives. But no, there was no mistake. It was Melissa. She wore the dark green dress I had bought her for our anniversary last year, the one she had claimed was too fancy to wear anywhere. And yet, here she was, standing outside a bar, laughing with some man like they shared an inside joke I wasn't in on. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I should have driven away, canceled the ride, pretended I never saw anything. But some twisted instinct kept me rooted in place, forcing me to watch. Then, as if sensing me, Melissa turned her head slightly. Her eyes locked onto mine through the windshield. For a split second, her smile faded. Her posture stiffened. I could see the shock registering on her face, the wheels turning in her head, as she scrambled for an explanation. The man beside her, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisp button-down, followed her gaze and looked in my direction. He had no idea who I was. No reason to flinch. He just stood there, oblivious, hands in his pockets, waiting. Melissa turned back to him, saying something quickly before stepping forward, walking toward my car like nothing was wrong. I watched her approach, my heart pounding. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. Should I confront her? Should I play along? The passenger door opened. She slid into the back seat. "Drive," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My jaw clenched. The air in the car felt suffocating. "Where to?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She hesitated. "Home." I swallowed the lump in my throat, shifted into drive, and pulled away from the curb. The silence between us was louder than any argument we had ever had. The tires rolled smoothly over the wet pavement, the sound of rainwater splashing beneath us filling the silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought my fingers might go numb. Melissa sat in the back seat, the space between us stretching wider than it ever had in our 12 years of marriage. She didn't speak. Neither did I. I watched her through the rearview mirror. Her arms were crossed, her body angled slightly away from me, like she wanted to disappear into the shadows of the car. Every so often, she shifted uncomfortably, as if waiting for me to say something. But I didn't. I let the silence fester. Let the weight of what had just happened sit between us. She had called the ride herself. Had she not seen my name pop up as her driver? Had she really not noticed? Or had she hoped I wouldn't? "Jake," she finally said, her voice hesitant. Don't. My tone was sharp, more than I intended. But I didn't care. She sighed, pressing her fingers against her temple. It's not what it looked like. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Really? Because from where I was sitting, it looked exactly like what I think it is. She didn't answer right away. Outside, the city lights blurred past, glowing in streaks of gold and red. I exhaled through my nose, trying to keep my voice even. Who is he? Melissa shifted. Jake, please. Who is he? She hesitated. Just someone from work. A deep, hollow feeling settled in my chest. I didn't know what I had expected, but somehow hearing her say it out loud made it worse. I gritted my teeth. And what were you doing with someone from work at a bar, dressed like that? She exhaled sharply. It wasn't. She stopped herself, then shook her head. I was going to tell you. Tell me what? That you've been sneaking around behind my back? Her hands balled into fists in her lap. It's complicated. No, I said, gripping the wheel. It's actually really simple. Either you were doing something wrong, or you weren't. So which is it, Melissa? She looked away, out the window, as if searching for an escape that wasn't there. I already knew the answer. I pulled into our driveway, cutting the engine. We sat there for a moment, the only sound between us our unsteady breathing. Finally, she reached for the door handle. Jake, I didn't let her finish. I got out first, slamming the door behind me. I needed air. I needed space. Because if I stayed in that car 1 second longer, I wasn't sure what I'd do. Melissa followed me up the front steps, but I didn't wait for her. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and left her standing in the rain. The front door shut behind me with a hollow thud, sealing me inside the house we had built together. The walls, the furniture, the framed wedding photos lining the hallway, they all felt like strangers now, mocking me with memories of a life that suddenly felt like a lie. Outside, the rain had picked up, drumming against the roof in uneven bursts. Melissa still stood on the porch, hesitating. I could see her silhouette through the frosted glass of the door. For a moment, I thought she might turn around and leave. Maybe she should. But then, slowly, she pushed the door open and stepped inside, water dripping from her hair onto the hardwood floor. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. Jake, she started, her voice quieter now. I turned away from her, running a hand through my hair, trying to steady my breathing. I don't want to do this tonight, Melissa. She flinched at the sharpness of my tone. We have to talk. I let out a humorless chuckle, shaking my head. Oh, now you want to talk? She closed her eyes for a moment before taking a cautious step forward. I didn't mean for you to find out like this. That made something in me snap. So you were hiding something. Her lips parted, but no words came. That was all the confirmation I needed. I turned to face her, the anger rising in my chest like a wave I couldn't hold back. How long? Melissa blinked. Jake, how long? Her hands trembled at her sides. It's not. Just tell me the damn truth, Melissa. She swallowed hard, looking down. A few months. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I staggered back a step, breathing uneven. A few months. Not days. Not weeks. Months. I forced myself to stay upright, to not let the weight of her betrayal crush me. I thought about all the nights she had come home late, all the times she had smiled at me like nothing was wrong, kissed me goodbye in the mornings, told me she loved me. Was any of it real? I let out a shaky breath. And him? My voice barely came out. Is he more than just someone from work? Her silence was deafening. I laughed bitterly. Right. Of course. Melissa took another step closer. Jake, please. I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. Don't! The room felt too small, the air too thick. I needed to get away, to breathe. I grabbed my keys off the table. I'm going out. Melissa's eyes widened. Where? Does it matter? Before she could say anything else, I opened the door and walked back out into the storm. Let the rain wash it all away. The rain soaked through my jacket within seconds, but I barely noticed. I just drove. No destination in mind, no plan, just the road stretching endlessly in front of me. The streetlights blurred through the raindrops on my windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. I should have been exhausted. The weight of everything pressing down on me should have drained me completely. But I was running on something else now. Something colder, something sharper. Betrayal. Melissa, my wife, my partner, the woman I had built a life with, had been lying to me for months. And I had been too blind to see it. The dashboard clock read 12:47 a.m. when I finally pulled into a parking lot. A small diner, one of those old-school places that still had checkered floors and waitresses who called you on. It wasn't crowded, just a few tired truckers, a guy in a hoodie staring into his coffee, and a waitress leaning against the counter, flipping through a magazine. I took a seat in the back, away from the others. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, but a kind smile, came over with a coffee pot. "Rough night?" she asked, pouring before I even ordered. I let out a hollow laugh. "Something like that." She nodded like she had seen 100 men sit in that exact seat with that exact look on their faces. "Let me know if you need anything, sugar." I muttered a thanks and wrapped my hands around the warm mug, staring at the dark liquid inside. My phone buzzed on the table. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Melissa. I let it ring. A few seconds later, a text popped up. "Melissa, Jake, please come home. We need to talk." Talk. Right. Because now she wanted to fix things. Another buzz. "Melissa, I know you're angry. Just please, let's not do this like this." I clenched my jaw, my fingers tightening around the phone. What did she expect? That we'd sit down and have some heart-to-heart, and I just, what? Forgive her? The waitress walked by again, pausing when she saw my face. "You okay, hon?" I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to nod. "Yeah. Just trying to figure some things out." She gave me a knowing look. "Well, whatever it is, don't let it eat you up. Sometimes, a thing's already broken before we realize it." I stared at her, her words hitting deeper than she probably meant them to. Was our marriage already broken? Had it been cracked and crumbling long before tonight? I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing for sure. When I walked back through that front door, nothing would ever be the same again. The coffee had gone cold by the time I finally left the diner. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the streets slick with the remnants of the storm. My head ached, my body felt heavy, but I knew I couldn't sit there forever. Eventually, I had to face her. The drive home felt shorter than before, my thoughts drowning out the sound of the tires against the wet pavement. I pulled into the driveway, the porch light casting a dim glow over the front door. She was waiting for me. Melissa stood just inside the doorway, arms crossed, looking like she had spent the last hour rehearsing exactly what to say. As I stepped inside, she exhaled in relief. "Jake." I brushed past her without a word, peeling off my wet jacket and tossing it onto the chair. She followed me into the living room. "I thought you weren't coming back." I let out a dry laugh. "Believe me, I considered it." She winced but didn't argue. Instead, she took a slow breath, choosing her next words carefully. "Jake, just answer one thing." I cut in, my voice tired, raw. "Are you in love with him?" Melissa's lips parted slightly, and for a moment, she looked like she might deny it. But then she hesitated, just for a second. And that hesitation told me everything. My stomach twisted. I looked away, staring at the floor, at the couch, anywhere but at her. She stepped closer. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Melissa?" I snapped, finally meeting her eyes. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks a hell of a lot like my wife sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face, and spending months with another man while I was stupid enough to believe we were okay." She flinched but didn't look away. "I never meant to hurt you." I laughed bitterly. "Yeah. Well, congratulations. You did." Silence filled the space between us, thick and suffocating. Then, finally, she whispered, "It was a mistake." I let out a slow, shaky breath. "Which part? Lying to me? Or getting caught?" She swallowed hard, her fingers twisting together. "I didn't plan for this to happen, Jake. It just did." I shook my head, running a hand over my face. "Things like this don't just happen, Melissa. You don't just trip and fall into someone else's arms." Her face crumpled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I was lonely," I scoffed. "Lonely? You were lonely?" I gestured around the house. "Melissa, I've been here every single day, working, providing, loving you. And you were lonely?" Her voice broke. "It wasn't about you." That stung more than anything else she had said. I turned away, shaking my head. "I can't do this right now." She reached for me, fingers barely grazing my arm. "Jake, please." I pulled away before she could touch me. "Don't." I grabbed my keys again, but this time, I wasn't sure if I'd come back. I didn't leave. I wanted to. I wanted to slam the door behind me, disappear into the night, drive until I ran out of road. But something kept me there, standing in the middle of our living room, staring at the woman I no longer recognized. Melissa wiped at her eyes, but the tears kept coming. She looked exhausted, like she had been carrying the weight of this for too long. "Jake," she whispered, "I don't want to lose you." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "You should have thought about that before you threw away everything we built." She flinched. "I know. And I hate myself for it." I turned away, staring at the wedding photo on the wall. The two of us, younger, happier, caught in a moment that now felt like it belonged to different people. "What was it then?" I asked, my voice hollow. "What did he give you that I didn't?" Melissa hesitated. "It wasn't about—" "Don't say it wasn't about me," I snapped, spinning back around to face her. "Because it was. It had to be. Otherwise, why do it?" She exhaled shakily, rubbing her arms like she was cold. I felt forgotten. I blinked. "Forgotten?" She nodded slowly. "Not because of anything you did, Jake, but because of what we stopped doing. We stopped talking. Stopped looking at each other like we used to. It felt like we were just two people living in the same house instead of—" She stopped herself, swallowing hard. "Instead of a married couple." I hated how much her words cut into me. Because deep down, I knew she wasn't wrong. The late nights at work, the stress, the way we had fallen into routines instead of passion, I had noticed it too. I had felt it. But I never imagined she would go looking for something else to fill the void. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process everything. "So that's it? You just gave up?" Her voice broke. I didn't mean to. I swear. I shook my head, letting out a humorless chuckle. "That's the thing, Melissa. I never got to mean to do anything. I never got a choice in this. You made it for me." Her face crumpled, fresh tears spilling over. I wish I could take it back. I stared at her for a long moment. The woman I loved. The woman who had just shattered me. "Yeah," I said quietly. "So do I." The weight of the words settled between us like a final nail in the coffin. because no matter what happened next, there was no taking this back. The house felt smaller, suffocating. I paced the living room, running my hands over my face, through my hair, anything to keep from looking at her. Melissa stood near the couch, arms wrapped around herself, eyes pleading. "Jake, I need you to tell me if there's any way we can fix this." I let out a slow, bitter exhale. "Fix this?" I turned to her, shaking my head. "Melissa, you broke us. This isn't something you just glued back together and pretend it never happened." "I know that," she said, voice cracking. "But I need to know if we have anything left to save." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because I didn't know. I didn't know if I could ever touch her again without thinking of him. I didn't know if I could ever hear her say "I love you" without wondering if she had said it to someone else. I didn't know if I would ever trust her again. "I want to believe you," I admitted, my voice quieter now. "I want to believe that this wasn't who you are. But I don't know how to." Melissa wiped at her eyes. "I'll do anything, Jake. Just tell me what I have to do." I stared at her, searching for the woman I married in the face of the one who had betrayed me. "Tell me the truth," I said. Her breath hitched. "I have." "No," I said, my voice firm. "Tell me everything. The night you lied. The things you told him. How far this really went." Her face drained of color. She took a slow, shaky breath. "I can't," she whispered. A cold, sinking feeling settled in my chest. "You can't?" I repeated, stepping back like she had physically struck me. Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't want to hurt you more than I already have." I swallowed hard. "That's not why." She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I got my answer. I clenched my jaw. "You don't want to tell me because if I knew everything, there'd be no chance of fixing this." Her silence said it all. Something inside me snapped. Whatever thread had been holding me together, it broke. I grabbed my keys off the table. Melissa's eyes widened. "Jake, please don't go." I shook my head, stepping toward the door. "I have to, Melissa. Because if I stay here any longer, I don't know what I'll say. Or what I'll do." I turned the handle, but before I stepped outside, I looked back at her one last time. "I needed you to be honest," I said, voice hollow. "And you still couldn't do it." Then I walked out. And this time, I didn't look back. I drove without thinking, the city passing by in a blur of neon lights and wet pavement. My hands were tight on the wheel, my knuckles white. My heart pounded, but I wasn't sure if it was from anger or something worse, something deeper. I pulled into an empty parking lot near the river. The streetlights cast long, ghostly reflections on the water. I killed the engine and sat there, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me together. Melissa hadn't told me everything. She couldn't, which meant that whatever she was hiding was worse than what I already knew. I leaned my head against the headrest, shutting my eyes. I thought about all the nights she had come home late, the times she had looked at her phone and smiled at something she wouldn't show me. Had he touched her the way I had? Had she laughed with him like she used to with me? Had she whispered things to him that were meant only for us? My stomach turned. I clenched my fists. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the fact that she had let me be the fool. A sharp knock on my window made me jump. My heart slammed against my ribs as I turned my head. "Lucas." My brother stood outside in the rain, hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. His expression was unreadable. I rolled the window down. "How'd you know where to find me?" Lucas shrugged. "You're predictable." I let out a humorless laugh and ran a hand down my face. "Did Melissa call you?" "She didn't have to." He stepped back and nodded toward the passenger side. "You gonna let me in, or you planning to sit here all night?" I hesitated, then unlocked the door. He slid inside, shaking rain from his hair. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, he said, "You want to talk about it?" I let out a long breath. "Melissa cheated on me." Lucas didn't react, not right away. He just nodded slowly, like he had already guessed. "How long?" I swallowed hard. "Months." His jaw tightened. "You sure?" I laughed bitterly. "Not really. But I know enough." Lucas leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "So what are you gonna do?" That was the question, wasn't it? I shook my head. "I don't know, man. I really don't." Lucas was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "Look, I'm not gonna tell you what to do. But whatever you decide, don't do it out of anger. You'll regret it." I exhaled sharply. "Then what the hell am I supposed to do?" Lucas glanced out the windshield at the dark river beyond. "You decide if this is something you can ever come back from." I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, at the man who suddenly felt like a stranger. Could I? Had we already crossed a line we couldn't uncross? I didn't have the answer. But I knew I couldn't go home. Not yet. The rain had stopped by the time I left the parking lot, but the storm inside me still raged on. I drove aimlessly, Lucas's words playing over and over in my head. "You decide if this is something you can ever come back from." Could I? Melissa had been my everything for 12 years. We had built a life, shared dreams, made promises. But somewhere along the way, she had let those promises slip through her fingers. And now, she wanted me to decide if we could fix what she had broken. It wasn't fair. I found myself parked outside our house before I even realized I had driven there. The lights inside were still on, a faint glow through the curtains. She was waiting for me. For the first time, I didn't rush inside. I just sat there, staring at the front door, my stomach twisting, because I already knew the truth. Even if I wanted to forgive her, I'd never forget. Every time she touched me, I'd wonder if she had touched him the same way. Every time she looked at me, I'd wonder if she had looked at him with the same love. Every time she said she loved me, I'd wonder if she was lying. I clenched the steering wheel. I had been holding on to the past, onto the life I thought we still had. But that life was gone. She had made sure of that. Maybe if she had told me the whole truth. Maybe if she had come clean before I had to catch her. Maybe if she had fought for me instead of waiting for me to decide if I wanted to fight for her. But she hadn't. And that told me everything. I took one last deep breath, then reached for my phone. A few taps. A moment of hesitation. Then I hit call. "Hey, Lucas." My voice was steady, calm, resolute. "Yeah? Can I crash at your place tonight?" A pause. Then, "Yeah, of course." I exhaled, nodding to myself. Then, without another glance at the house that was no longer my home, I put the car in drive and left. This time for good. The end.